anything sadder than me losing Puff is my YouTube trolls' lives.
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 308. Talking about some more Slavic black metal stuff. Because along with, the Nordic stuff. Or the Mediterranean stuff.
I think it's a joke, sir. Like, Silly Sodus or Bigger Sticker, sir. What's, funny about Bigger Stickers?
The Slavic countries have been an important nexus for the creation of what we know as modern-day black metal. There's a whole lot of variety coming out of there, but at least in the early days, it all sort of fit into three artistic undercurrents. The first of which being the Temple of the Full Moon stuff from Poland, which tended to be heavily influenced by late 80s Bathory in terms of their incorporation of a lot of clean guitar stuff and atmospherics. Including a whole lot of keyboards, it also tended to be rather evil sounding, at least in the beginning years. This would be bands like Graveland, Velez, and even Behemoth before they got lame. That's right, Behemoth used to be true black metal before they started playing, Morbid Angel knockoff riffs for Ghost fans. A lot of bands playing this sort of endemic Polish style of black metal ended up going less evil and satanic and more nationalistic and folky later on, which sort of became its own thing. But that was definitely the Polish style in the early 90s. Further east, you have the really raw stuff coming out of Russia. From bands that fall under the Blazebirth Hall umbrella like Brain Called Raven Dark Rundagor, as well as bands that existed outside of that scene like Old Waynes. This style of black metal took a lot from Dark Throne, Burzum, and Immortal, tended to have very long, very subtly constructed songs with a heavy emphasis on atmosphere and a cold, freezing feeling. Also, at least in the case of a lot of the Blazebirth Hall bands, later on they went more nationalist and folky and pagan and triumphant sounding towards the end of their career, just like the Polish bands did. But in the beginning, it was all that evil, cold black metal stuff. In between these two sort of black metal nexuses, there's another stylistic undercurrent. This one coming out of Ukraine that went even heavier on the keyboards than the Polish stuff. It also started out very folky from the beginning, despite also being, pretty evil and satanic. Rather mystical sounding stuff. Progenitors of this style were Lucifugum, Nocturnal Mortem, Dubbuck, Astrophase, that kind of thing. And like the other Slavic scenes, as time went on, they abandoned a lot of those more evil aspects and went into more and more folky, triumphant sounding stuff. But there was one of those bands that split off from the rest and always kept it evil. Probably the truest of the true black metal coming out of that subsection of Europe.
There is a lot of fake stuff circulating these days, but we only stock the real thing.
The aforementioned Lucifugum, who I initially covered almost 5 years ago on episode 83. Not sure why I thought I could get through everything there is to be said about Lucifugum inside 18 minutes, and that episode came out pretty rushed sounding. So I thought I'd redo it in kind of a deeper dive. This is going to be part one of a series, because there's a whole lot to be said about Lucifugum. Along with Nocturnal Mortem, they pretty much invented black metal in a Ukrainian context. But for whatever reason, they're really not widely talked about nowadays at all, even though much like Nocturnal Mortem, they've continued to put out quality albums since their inception way back in 1995. Also, like Nocturnal Mortem, it's very much worth listening to their demos, because these aren't just like rough versions of songs that ended up on their first album. They're each kind of their own entity. And I figured we could go over them in order from my least favorite to my favorite, although that said, all these demos are pretty spectacular. First one I want to talk about is 1996's Gates of Nocticula.
약간 잡다한 것들이 다 들어가 있어요. 어디에 넣기도 애매한.
Yeah. Supposedly there's that The Kingdom Sorrow Behind the Northern Wind demo from a year prior to that, but it's basically just a dress rehearsal for Gates of Nocticula. It didn't even have a cover. It's never been officially re-released, unlike all their other demos, so from what I could tell, Lucifugum kind of considers that to be a non-canonical work, and so do I, so we're skipping it.
We'll do it live! Fuck it!
Even at this early stage, Lucifugum are very much distinguished from Nocturnal Mortem, mostly due to the fact that they're considerably more riff-focused than that band was, and also quite a bit heavier sounding. I mean, yeah, they have the same sort of atmospheric keyboards, but the guitar riffs themselves are a whole lot crunchier, with considerable notes of Rotting Christ in the more mid-pace section, and a nasty melodic yet poisonous feel to their tremolo pick section. Vocals on this demo are provided by one of my all-time favorite black metal singers, Faunist, the guitars and bass being done by Balamith, and another fellow by the name of Klist, sort of directing compositions from behind the scenes. He's actually the only constant member of Lucifugum over the years, despite the fact that he apparently hasn't ever picked up any of the instruments for the band. I guess he's more of a composer, sort of like Gorath from Temnozor. As you're hearing right now, the songs on this demo tend to be very dynamic and long, with lots of different sorts of sections. There's also quite a bit of tempo variation going on here. I mean, right now we've come out of that entirely synthesized section into almost sort of a doomy black metal kind of thing, with the guitar providing heavy accents to those lead keyboard melodic notes. From there we jump into a blast beat heavy section that's still utilizing those same sort of doomy melodies. I mean, this is super early in their career, but even at this point, Lucifugum were putting a lot of thought to how their songs were constructed. As you can tell by the subtle reoccurrence of that melodic motif from earlier in the song, now being given a blast beat backing instead of that mid-paced sort of rotting Christ style they initially introduced the melody with. The only other guy I've seen talk about Lucifugum at length is Nocturne, an old sort of classic reviewer from the early days of Metal Archives. I actually talked to him about Lucifugum through email, like way back in 2010 or something. For whatever reason, he actually hates this demo. I'm just like, huh? To that, I mean, you heard it. It sounded pretty good to me. Guess my brain's just wired differently. Also, Nocturne hated Argoslent and later Nocturnal Mortem, so I probably can't trust them. My second favorite Lucifugum demo, Skrovias na Dushnonim Nebo, or Through the Indifferent Sky, was actually their third release, or fourth if, we include that one weird demo that we're not talking about. It came out in 1997, and it's pretty stylistically different from Gates of Nocticula, although you can definitely tell it's the same band. Whereas Gates of Nocticula was very much in that sort of mid-paced, Bathory/Rotting Christ mode most of the time, this one's almost all blast beats, almost all tremolo picking, with very long riff phrases, somewhat reminiscent of the first Emperor album in that regard, though the riff themselves have a sort of melodic emotionality to them that is uniquely Slavic sounding. The bass guitar is also very prominent, which would become something of a trademark for Lucifugum going forward, and I have to think would also be a pretty big influence on bands like Hate Forest in the future. Compared to Gates of Nocticula, this is also a very monochromatic and intense sort of album. Not nearly as much of an emphasis on change-ups or keyboards, though they are still there, as you're hearing right now, and they are very well done when they do show up. But I mentioned Faunus is one of my favorite black metal vocalists. Man, that guy sounds mean. Also, funnily enough, keyboards were provided by Sartorius from Nocturnal Mortem, and the bass was played by Kinjaz Vargoth, also from Nocturnal Mortem. Lucifugum and Nocturnal Mortem were very connected in the early years of their histories. In fact, my favorite Lucifugum demo, and the one we're going to cover last, Path of the Wolf, was actually released as a split with Nocturnal Mortem's Return of the Vampire Lord demo. So if we were going to get super duper uber true cult metal elitists,
that's real metal. That's metal for motherfucking man.
My favorite ultra underground death metal demo would have to be Cryptokerberos' 1991 demo that I covered on Radio Free Innsmouth episode 275, but my favorite underground black metal demo has to be Lucifugum's Path of the Wolf from 1996. So right in between Gates of Nocticula and Through the Indifferent Sky. This demo is just nothing but memorable songs all the way through. It has an amazing sound to it, basically full-length album quality if you ask me. It also really shows off their connection to Nocturnal Mortem because it actually features Nocturnal Mortem's vocalist Kinjaz Vargoth trading verses back and forth with Faunus. They both have incredibly recognizable voices. If anybody tells you all black metal vocalists sound the same,
just get lost.
You shove this demo up their ass because it's got two of the best vocalists to ever do it. But this demo isn't only cool because of the guest vocals on it, right? It's awesome because of the really memorable songwriting and sense of compositional dynamics. Like this section right here, where they go into full-on Castlevania core.
This shit ain't nothing to me, you stupid piece of shit.
With these gradually escalating organ and synthesized string arrangements, building up to this sort of bass guitar-led intensity that you would only hear on a symphonic black metal album if the Lucifugum logo was on the cover. I maintain that nobody else does stuff that sounds exactly like this. Just a really unique take on symphonic melodic black metal. And of course you gotta bring back Vargoth and Faunus to trade off vocals again. It sounds fucking sick, and if you don't like it, you're probably opposing it.
Get out of here.
This demo and this era of Lucifugum is also rather unique in that, it's heavily symphonic and very Ukrainian black metal sounding, but it's not really folky at all. It's kind of got its own weird way of doing keyboard-based black metal melodies. Sort of a uniquely sinister melodic character to what those Casios are cranking out. Also, did I mention, Faunus is like one of my favorite black metal vocalists. Because he is. He's great. He sounds like he's black metal vomiting or some shit.
Well, that just happened.
The atmosphere on this demo is like nothing else. And I think I like it more than Through the Indifferent Sky because of all the change-ups. Like this one right here, which is very hostile sounding. My dude is still screaming, by the way. Dude's hanging on to that shit like Lord Worm doing black metal vocals or something. And there's more of those characteristic Lucifugum style synths. Again, not really the same sort of folkiness you would get from Nocturnal Mortem. They've got their own sort of weird melodic character to them. And I think they're great. I think this demo's great. In fact, the only thing better than this demo in this style is the long-awaited first Lucifugum full-length album, Na Christianity, or On the Sorge of Christianity, which manages to synthesize the varied compositions of their first two demos with the intensity of the Through the Indifferent Sky demo. If you thought Nocturnal Mortem's Goat Horns was pretty cool sounding, but you wished it was a lot more intense and guitar-oriented, this is the album for you. One of the best black metal albums ever made, and it shoves a wooden stake up the ass of just about every other work from the symphonic black metal genre. You wouldn't think symphonic black metal could sound this fucking hostile.
What's up your pants here?
Check out this part right here with these overlapping melodies. This is really high-level black metal songwriting. Far from using the keyboards as window dressing, they're actually probably essential for this music to work, because if you were to do all of this with just guitars, it would kind of mush together. Having those different keyboard voices really helps you pick out all the different complex layers going on. The songwriting here. Just about tied with Obtained Enslavement's Witchcraft album in terms of just how many levels of counterpoint there are. They're also not done with the celebrity black metal guest appearances, because not only is Sartorius back playing all the keyboards on this album, you also have Munruthel from Nocturnal Mortem, Astrophase, Thundercraft, Temnozor, and like every other black metal band ever playing drums. His performance really sticks out on my favorite song of the album, the incredibly rhythmically intense and unique sounding Wolves Part 2. Wolves Part 1 was on the Path of the Wolf demo, where it kind of stuck out in being rather monomaniacal in its intensity. It's actually stylistically a lot closer to the Through the Indifferent Sky demo than it is on anything else from Path of the Wolf, which is ironic given that, you know, Path of the Wolf and the song's called Wolves. You know what I'm saying?
You know what I'm saying? Like,
It wasn't my favorite song on that demo, but it did kind of stick out. Wolves Part 2 is my favorite song on the Sorge of Christianity, and it also very much sticks out, not only amongst its brethren on the same album, not only amongst every song Lucifugum has ever written, but amongst kind of every black metal song I've ever heard. Nothing really sounds like this. I mean, you get this weird drum roll, and the main instrument being the bass guitar, alternating with these short stabs of tremolo-picked guitar melody and intensity. They jump back and forth between those two styles during the entirety of the first half of the song, utilizing the electric guitar more so for accents. Kind of quick stabs in and out of the music, which is primarily led by those bass and drums. Then as the song progresses, you get into more of those overlapping synth melodies that I showcased earlier, being utilized in this more hostile and kind of thrashy context. And speaking of fucking thrashy, get ready for this shit. Because the second half of this song goes full-on intense black thrash, as if to symbolize the fact that the guitar is taking a more prominent role. This section leads in with guitar only before jumping into this ultra-intense sort of symphonic black thrash, which is not really a genre you'd think would exist, and it really doesn't outside of Lucifugum and fellow Ukrainians Dugbuk, who also had a very different take on this sort of sound. I like a lot of the Slavic stuff for the same reason I like the Japanese stuff. They just do weird things with genre tropes that you wouldn't think would work together so well in concert, but goddamn do they ever pull it off. This is like some of the best black metal I've ever heard, and yet it sounds like no other black metal band. Really liking these triumphant sort of keyboard melodies here. It's hard to pick out like individual samples of Lucifugum songs because their melodies are so long form and complicated. It's difficult to cut in and out of them. But rest assured, if you listen to all these songs in a row, it's gonna blow your fucking mind. Lucifugum's On the Sorge of Christianity, absolutely essential black metal album. For most bands, this would be like the highlight of the career. They're not getting any better than this. Lucifugum, however, kept experimenting and changing styles on each and every album after this, starting with 2000's Na Krucha Dovklochia on Hooks to the Pieces, which is probably the closest Lucifugum have ever come to doing sort of a 50-50 transition album. In this case, between the symphonic style of their early works and the weird experimentation they had going on in their mid-period. If anything, this whole album is almost like a follow-up statement to what they were saying with the song Wolves Part 2. Pretty much this entire album is black thrash, with keyboards being utilized less as the lead melodic voice and more just for emphasis. Which is a gutsy move, given that part of why On the Sorge of Christianity was so great was those keyboards. But when you hear the results, it definitely works out for them. Those really long, winding melodies that first appeared on the Through the Indifferent Sky demo are also a pretty major focus on this album, particularly during the less thrashy sections like the one you're hearing right now. Like, this is almost just one long, unending, ever-unfolding, consonant melodic stream. Like, I can't even count how many measures this particular melodic phrase goes on for, but it does unravel eventually into a pretty interesting sort of interlude section, this time utilizing acoustic instrumentation in concert with synthesized elements.
And they'll be playing the synthesizer here. Sing away, boys!
You know, I got some clean guitars in there mixed in with that black metal piano I love so much. But it wouldn't be Lucifugum if it didn't also go somewhere unexpected after that, which means we're getting another fucking thrash break. Like I said earlier, most of the music on this album is black thrash. It's just really weird Lucifugum style black thrash, which means that you're going to have these really harsh riffs mixed in with sort of an emotive melody, as well as their trademark keyboard accents. Whole albums like that, perhaps their most varied effort ever released. Stylistically, not only are they setting themselves up for the weird shit they're going to do later on, they're even kind of introducing a lot of ideas that would be picked up by other Ukrainian bands later on, well after the initial sort of Nocturnal Mortem Lucifugum style thing evolved off into black metal from that part of the world as we know it today. For instance, I gotta think Druidic was listening to stuff like this. I mean, this is from 2000. That's 3 years before the first Druidic album, 4 years before Nocturnal Mortem started doing a lot of stuff like this on Built-In Sean. We've got Lucifugum taking that rhythmic complexity of their black thrash style and applying it to a more melancholic, emotionally tinged, sort of clean guitar melody. It fits right in with the other songs on this album, and yet, if you were to take out the keyboards and some of the rhythm guitar's angularity, this wouldn't sound out of place on something like Blood in Our Wells. Okay, this album was ahead of its time, and it's a pretty good place to leave this episode off because, as I said earlier, this album is the transition towards their weird experimental middle period that we will be revisiting when we get around to Lucifugum Part 2. So there you go, something to look forward to. Thanks for watching or listening, whatever you did, and I will see you in the next episode.
Like, the worst I do anymore is smoke pot and drink alcohol. What?
You know what? So, anywho,
I haven't touched their duster in several days. I'm quite proud of myself.
days?
Several weeks, actually.